Going into this summit, going into this trip, there was a lot of speculation that intelligence sharing was going to be a big issue in light of what happened in the Oval Office a few weeks back. The president sharing some sensitive information with the Russian ambassador to the U.S. and the Russian foreign minister. That has taken on another life here as this trip has unfolded after the terrorist attack in Manchester. Where do things stand when it comes to intelligence sharing after these 9 days?
Well, you might remember that Trump, when he was in Israel, also mentioned at the end of a press meeting, kind of offhandedly, that, hey, I never said anything about Israel providing some of the intelligence I may have provided to the Russians. There's a lot of questions about, the leaks coming out of the United States and whether, other nations can comfortably share all of their intelligence with the U.S. at this point. When Trump left, you may remember there was a real firestorm about the firing of Jim Comey and some of the revelations that came from that. I think the White House was glad to get on a plane out of here at the time, but they are coming back into that storm, and it hasn't really calmed down a lot with the news that now Jared Kushner is someone whose activities are of interest to the FBI probe.
Yeah, Bill, help us understand what happens next. When the president wraps up this trip, he's at the La Scala Philharmonic concert now. He'll have a dinner with the Italian president, flies back to Washington this weekend. What's going to greet him upon his return?
Well, the best news, I think, from the White House perspective is that Congress won't be here. They're off, and so he's not going to have to deal with any big public hearings about the Russia probe, about the firing of Comey, or anything like that. That's off the table this week, so I think it gives the White House a chance to try to reset the agenda. That said, those stories haven't gone away. We know now that Jared Kushner, the son-in-law, Trump's son-in-law, is someone that the FBI is looking at very closely. So that really brings all of this debate and controversy about the Russia probe and their role in the last year's election into the heart of the White House.
Megan, we heard from a few people out of politics now. John Boehner, the former Speaker of the House, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for president back in 2016. They were talking today, one directly, one less directly, about the way that this president has approached the job.
It was directly.
It was directly. What did you hear from Hillary Clinton today? She spoke at Wellesley at the commencement there.
So Hillary Clinton gave the commencement speech at Wellesley today. Interestingly, she gave...
Second time.
Second time. Yeah. 1969 was the last time she'd given that commencement speech. It was not a veiled reference to Donald Trump. She was referring to the last time she'd given that commencement speech, speaking about Richard Nixon and the differences that she and her classmates held toward him, and then making a reference to a president who had, in fact, subsequently been impeached. It was a pretty full frontal assault from Hillary Clinton. She has, in recent months, recent weeks more specifically, really amped up her public rhetoric, not only on the reasons why she thought she lost the election in terms of Russian interference, but also on what she views as this real attack on American values, attack on women, attack on minorities. Today, she really singled out the impact of Trump's healthcare, the administration's healthcare bill, on the most vulnerable members of society. But make no mistake, who she was accusing of potentially being the next impeachment target, the man in the White House right now.
All right, now the former House Speaker, what did he have to say about the sitting president?
Yeah, a complete disaster were his words, actually, in two words. Give him a little bit of credit for foreign policy, a little bit of credit on his war against the Islamic State, but he was also really saying, look, this has been something that we have all witnessed, that this bouncing around, that the inability to get a front foot on the agenda, that the constant turmoil now with Jared Kushner in the frame, as Bill was discussing there. This has not been an administration that's put forward the kind of legislative accomplishments that it would need to counter even a soft pushback in the media on minor scandals, let alone one that's confronted nearly daily with major scandals and no real legislative progress.
Let's add a third guest to our roundtable here. Craig Gordon, executive editor from Washington, joining us now from the shores of Sicily. Craig, great to see you. Let me ask you to draw a contrast here between the summit that's going on today in Sicily and the one that went on a couple of days back, the NATO summit, in terms of what the president had to say or how he approached it. Did he have an easier time interacting with these leaders in Sicily than he did in Brussels?
He mostly had an easier time here because we just didn't see him as much. So, as people know, out in Brussels, he kind of shoved the guy from Montenegro out of the way. He had a pretty odd handshake with Macron today. It was much more, working lunches, working dinners, G7, a small table, 7 world leaders. So he, I think, mostly stayed out of trouble today as they beat him up pretty hard on climate and trade.
Craig, a big focus here was terrorism. In light of what happened in Manchester, it was something that the White House wanted to be discussed at both of these summits as well. How did that play out at the summit? As you mentioned, you had limited access to what these leaders were talking about and saying, but in terms of the readouts we got, the statements we got from the world leaders, what did they say about fighting terrorism going forward?
I mean, look, the Italian hosts here were eager to have a summit different than the one in Brussels. And the one thing all 7 of these folks agree on is the need to fight terrorism. They could debate the level of it, the different amount of spending. But at the end of the day, they were able to put out a pretty strong statement. Honestly, a lot of it was fairly obvious that terrorism is bad. Probably the most interesting thing in that statement was Theresa May pushing very hard to get social media companies, Facebook and such, to do more to crack down on kind of the hate speech that proliferates on those sites. But there was very little in there for anybody at that table to disagree with. And so it was one moment of unity in what's been a few days of disunity.
Bill Faries, let me ask you quickly here. Going into the NATO summit, the White House was very keen to get all NATO allies to contribute 2%, the equivalent of 2% of their GDP to defense spending. You can quibble with the tone, the way he delivered his speech yesterday in Brussels. Is he walking away from that summit with any results, Bill? Are these countries making new commitments to pay up more?
I'd be hard-pressed to say that they got a big victory out of anything related to NATO spending. There already was a commitment in place by NATO allies to get to that 2% threshold early or middle of the next decade. The Trump administration always wanted to see that greatly accelerated. Only 5 nations right now, I think, make that threshold. But we're not seeing, that that's going to happen much faster than it was really ever planned to at this point.
Megan, let me go to you for one last question here on the domestic front. We have a new heir apparent to a congressional seat. Ryan Zinke's successor now is going to be somebody who a couple of days ago was accused of body slamming a reporter. What are the implications of that? What's the import of that race in Montana, which took place yesterday?
Well, the one thing I think that we're looking back at this week is this may be the one week that Donald Trump actually didn't lose the week in terms of politicians, but Greg Gianforte, accused of body slamming that reporter,
breaking glasses, yeah,
also seems to have won the week as well as losing the week. So it's been a really interesting one. Look, this is a week in which we've had a standoff over intel sharing. We've had a recent terror attack in London. We have a massive, international import of the G7 over trade, over climate change. We spent a lot of this week talking about a reporter being slammed in Montana. That is just a sign, I think, not so much about Trumpism, but how much the level of political discourse has really sank, how much these issues are still at the forefront, how much we're actually spending time talking about them in this era. Things have got to change. Trump is going to try and come back and pull it back. He's got to put some wins on the board if he's going to put any of this behind him. Greg Gianforte was this week's distraction. Who knows what's going to be next week?